好一点的，在上面可以买得到。Okay, the meeting starts. Please ring the opening bell.
Hello everyone. Wow, we have a 6 table and a lot of guests today. It's something big. That's really good.
Four-way test. Rotarian, please all rise for the four-way test. Four-way test. The things we think, say, or do. First,
Is it true?
second,
Is it fair to walk the serve?
third,
Will you wear refreshes?
fourth.
Will the officials walk the serve?
Thank you. Please be seated. Rotarian song. May we have Hippie Path be us to sing the Rotarian song?
Okay.
Thank you, Hippie Path.
Okay, let's sing. R-O-T-A-R-Y, that spells Rotary. R-O-T-A-R-Y is more than MC. From north to south, from east to west, we Protestants who serve the best. R-O-T-A-R-Y, that spells Rotary.
Thank you, Hippie Path. Introduction of visiting Rotarian and honorable guest. May we have Amy.
Well, it's gotta be a rather difficult job today because we have so many guests and the guest is quite long. It's feel like a charter ceremony now. Right? So thank you, PPA. Appreciate your effort.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all distinguished guests. So many guests today, and really what a wonderful day today. And I would like to introduce the first today's speaker, Veronica. And next is Joanna from Netherlands. So next I would like to hand the microphone to Jessica. So she will introduce the Iowa member.
Hello everyone, thank you for inviting us. We are the International Women's Association of Taichung, and it's such an honor to be here today with every one of you. And now we are come here to support our President Veronica for her speech, and I'm going to introduce our Iowa member. When I call your name, please just stand up. Petula Paris and her husband Yuana Wang, Jessica Chang, Terry Liao, Christine Fuller, Harry Baxi, Vali Ahmed, Jen Lu, Jin Wang, Yvonne Chen, Patty Hun, Melissa Chen, Jen Barton, Jelly, Claire Liu, and Jane Liu. It's all our members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. I would like to especially introduce Jessica. She was the co-registered founder in 2016 of Iowa International Women Association of Taichung, right? Okay, thank you very much for your introduction. And the next, I'd like to some of the friend of Cornell. First one is Tina. And our former member, Mike. Professor Ye, our old friend, Cornell's husband, and former member Retna, and his good friend Nancy. Next one is Mr. Wen Chen. Next is PP Ski.
안녕하세요.
Next one is Jennifer, Oakley's wife. Sophia, whose wife. And Catherine, vice friend. Sue, wife. Anna, wife. And next one, Yona. And Tracy, next one, Chloe, our first lady. Okay, did I miss anyone? 都介绍到了啊，到没有 ？OK， Oh yeah, I forgot it. Yoko, our member.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Thanks to be
It's almost 6 years,
Yeah, 6 years.
right?
That's right.
Okay, good to see you. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, PPA. Welcome visiting Rotarian song. Joanna, please stand up. And here we have PP Karth lead us to sing the welcome visiting Rotarian song.
Guest of Rotary, we greet you. Oh, guest of Rotary, we greet you. We want you to feel our friendship is real. We are glad you're here today. So take back all of your shield. Regards from all the fellows here. And one once more, you are here, our Lord. Come again, Rotarian, come again.
Thank you, PP Karth. President Chan.
Yeah, hello, it's my part, and it's such an honor to have this ceremonial. So, we just finished a very, very wonderful week. You can see our international service thanks and us. We go with all the members from the National Museum of National Science, and we have a very good trip to know more about our forests and all the creators inside. Okay? And thanks, Min. Thank you to lead us to visit the Yang. So we have quite a good time at Yang. Next one. Right. Yes, thanks to the first group. We just finished our Moon Festival party, and I have to thanks again Min and appreciate Vito lead us to have a great night. Thank you all and Anna. So you give us a great song. Yeah, that's a great night. Thank you for your attending. All right. And the other group, like group 3, going to to know how to host our Christmas party. And we plan to host our Christmas party in 国家歌剧院, National Opera Museum, Opera Theater. So I suppose it's gonna be a great one. So welcome to join us in Christmas party. And yeah, the group 4 about the charter party. So we start to moving to arrange it. So well, everybody's busy, but I think we're gonna have a good year. Thanks to you attend today's formal meeting. And we just going to prepare another combat with Wenxin and Wenxin's player just videos last Tuesday. I heard PPL told me they're quite good in badminton, but I think we are going to do something to fight back. Just like President Trump, we are not going to surrender. Yeah. Go. All right. So I think that's my part. Thank you. Thank you.
Secretary, the charter anniversary of Zhongzhou Se will be held on November 11th. If you are interested, please sign with Anne. And the October board meeting will be held after the regular meeting. So all the board members, please reserve your time to attend. Okay, that's all is our main program. And we have, for now, we will have a speaker introduction.
I don't know how to start. I was so touched and amazed to see such a huge crowd from IWAT, International Women's Association of Taichung, to come here to support our president. Thank you for your presence. And also I'd like to thank my 3 best Rotarian friends who loved us. But today I'm glad that they come back to also support me and also to enjoy the wonderful speech. It's Ging and Mike and Ratana. And I hope that this is the start of your coming back. Okay, and also I want to thank all the Rotarian friends for your support. Your presence really means a lot to me. But I believe that today's speech will be really unforgettable story for everybody, because I think the Korea War has a great impact in Taiwan. So I believe everybody will have lots of questions. So please save some time for us to ask questions. And now I have to keep my introduction of our speaker short. I think she has a very long, interesting stories. Veronica is, as you know, the president of the International Women's Association of Taichung. And she also has 6 children. Very busy mother. She told me that she is a typical Korean tiger mother. So her children can never get low grades. Always have to be has to be A for any test. And she has lived in 12 countries and visiting 37 countries. Strong to remember. So I think she has very interesting life stories to share. But today we are coming not for her story. Perhaps next time we can invite her back. Yeah. But now I would like to have Veronica to come here and share your story, your parents' story with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mihua, for that wonderful introduction. I didn't know I was that great. So anyway, I am the president of IWAT, the International Women's Association of Taichung. We are a non-profit organization that was founded in 1984. And in fact, BY is one of the founding members of our organization. We just celebrated our 36th anniversary. And we are an organization that's there. We're comprised of almost 100 members, both expat and Taiwanese. And we're there to, support and encourage women in Taiwan, or in Taichung actually, and we do that by providing interesting events and tours for the women here. And we also support 3 charities at the moment. We fundraise through special events, and we support the Taiwan Women's Rescue Foundation, the Premature Baby Foundation, and also Andrew Food Bank. And we also do volunteer work too. So anyway, I wanted to plug our organization because my members told me they'd kill me if I didn't do that. So anyway, you'll have to bear with me because this is the first time I'm speaking publicly about my parents. I'm a little nervous. I will be hiding behind this podium because I have to operate my PowerPoint when I speak. So if you don't see me, then that's okay. I don't want you to see me. And also, if you want to know more about our organization, you can come and see me after the presentation, or you can talk to one of our members, or you can go to our website. It's www.iwat.org. I'm sorry, gentlemen, it's women's only, so maybe someday you can start your own organization, but this is just for us. Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Veronica Karth. I'm sorry, technical difficulties here. Let's see, okay. Sometimes it's very sensitive. Hello, my name is Veronica Karth, or Che Ine in Korean. I am South Korean, born in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States of America in 1956. Yes, I'm not as young as I look. However, I am not here today to talk about myself. Rather, I want to tell you a very special story of suffering and separation, of overcoming great difficulties, of achieving success and happiness. This is the story of my parents. My father, Ung Sang Choi, was born in 1925. And my mother, In Young Kim, was born in 1928 in what is now North Korea. Both my parents grew up under Japanese rule, which lasted from 1910 to 1945. And they were educated in Japanese and only allowed to speak Japanese. They were even forced to adopt Japanese names. My mother remembered that her last name was Shigemura. Even though they were severely punished if they spoke Korean, they secretly learned to speak Korean in their homes. Their mothers were childhood friends and often talked about having children who would one day unite their families through marriage. However, my paternal grandmother married and moved to Beijing with her husband who practiced Chinese medicine. One night, he went out and never came back. It was assumed that he was murdered for the opium that he carried in his bag. Widowed at 30, my grandmother returned to my mother's hometown, Haeju, with my father and his little brother. Life was hard, and my father had to work to support his family while attending high school. Even so, he was a top student in his class. Sadly, he had little time for anything else, especially friends. My mother felt sorry for him, and she and her mother frequently visited his home to see his mother. Then, all of his hard work paid off, and he was accepted to Tokyo Imperial University in Seoul, the best university in Korea. Meanwhile, my mother was also excelled in school. Her father owned a hat shop called Smith's Hat Shop and was very wealthy. He made frequent trips to Japan to bring back hats in the latest fashion. My mother said she cried when her mother forced her to wear a beautiful and expensive wool coat that her father had brought back for her, because it made her stand out from all the other girls. They lived in the only Western house in their town. So this is my mother's family, and the picture in the middle, let me see if I can, unfortunately I don't have a laser printer, but this is my grandfather, and this is my grandmother, and my mother is standing right there. So actually she also came from a family of 6, so she was the oldest of 6 children also. There's my mother right there, wearing that wool coat that made her cry. And there she is with her sister and her brother. And we'll talk more about her family later. Now her grandfather was, I mean not her grandfather, but her father was always so proud of her and encouraged her to pursue her studies. Her passion was for literature and writing, and she was often called upon by her school to make fiery and patriotic speeches for Japan. After one such speech, she was chased home by some older Korean boys who felt she was a traitor and deserved to be beaten. She only made the speeches in obedience to her teachers and for the grades, but never spoke from the heart. She was, until the very end, 100% Korean. World War II broke out, and many Koreans were forced to serve in the Japanese army. The only options available to young women who were to either work in the weapons factory or to attend medical school. My mother had to abandon her dreams of becoming a writer. She did not want to work in the weapons factory, helping the Japanese with their war effort, so she took the entrance exams and was the only woman chosen from her hometown that year to go to the medical school in Seoul. So, at 16 years old, my mother went to Seoul to attend medical school. So there's my mother. She's in the picture on the, let's see, it would be to your left, is her high school graduation. And then the picture on your right is her medical school graduation picture. All right, since my mother's family was Catholic, she stayed at a dormitory in a convent run by nuns. My mother was never quiet and well-mannered like most girls her age, and the nuns had their hands full with her. Girls were supposed to attend Mass every morning, but my mother would hide in the closet and sleep. Whenever the man selling bread would come calling underneath her window, my mother would tie a rope to a basket and lower it down to him so they could buy bread, which was against the dormitory rules. She would escape to go to the movies, walking across a wooden plank that she extended from a window to the ledge of the building next door. The nuns were furious when they found out what she was doing and told her that she would never find a man who would want to marry her. Then, in 1945, the war ended and Korea was divided. My mother's hometown, Haeju, was in North Korea and came under the Russians. Seoul was in South Korea and came under the Americans. When the Russians came marching into her town, my grandmother hid my mother and her sister in huge clay pots used for fermenting kimchi because she was afraid that the soldiers would try to rape them. My mother said she stayed in that kimchi pot for 2 days. Back then, the American soldiers had a lot of money and could afford to pay women for their company. The Russian soldiers, however, were very poor and resorted to raping the local women. To protect their own daughters, women from the town would guide the Russian soldiers to the home of a girl with a bad reputation, and they would rape her. I was horrified when my mother told me this, but she said it was the only way to prevent every young girl from being assaulted. With the Russians in the north and the Americans in the south, the political scene in Korea changed drastically, with the north becoming communist and the south becoming democratic. It was no longer possible for people in the south to go to the north and vice versa. However, my mother was homesick and missed her parents and her 5 siblings. At that time, you could hire a man to guide you through places in the mountains where there were no border patrols. My mother was able to visit her family and set off to go back to the south. As my mother was crossing the mountain with a group of people, a North Korean guard in a lookout tower far away saw them. When she heard the gunshot from his rifle, my mother said her legs gave out from under her and she fainted. Everyone else in the group just ran towards the border and escaped. A while later, my mother woke up to the feeling of a bayonet poking her in the side. She was forced to walk back to her hometown and was put in prison for trying to escape to the south. For 3 days and nights, she sat in her cell and looked up at a tiny window. Being young and naive, she did not feel afraid and just found the whole experience interesting. She could hear screams of people being tortured and a weak voice calling out from a cell beside her. When she peeked through a crack in the wall separating their cells, she saw the most horrible sight of a man who had been starved to the point of death. Fortunately, her home was being used as the command center for the Russians, so the commander pulled some strings and got her out of jail with just a warning. Her father thought it was too dangerous for her to go back and forth across the border and told her to go to the south and not come back again until it was safe. It never became safe. So at 17, my mother never saw her family again. My mother survived on income from a rental property that her father had bought for her, living frugally and using all the money for her education. Her medical textbooks were in German, so she learned how to speak and understand the language. Finally, when she got her medical degree at the age of 22, in June of 1950, she decided to reward herself with a vacation to Gyeongju. It's a popular mountain resort in the east of South Korea. While she was vacationing there on a quiet Sunday morning on June 25th, North Korea, with the help of China and the Soviet Union, attacked South Korea, starting the Korean War that would last 3 years, ending in not a peace treaty, but just a ceasefire. My mother lost everything except for what she had packed in a suitcase. The most precious things she managed to save was a norige made of brass and jade. My mother's ancestors were members of the Korean royal court, and this antique norige was an ornament that was worn by the ladies in court. It had been passed on from one oldest daughter to the next, and my mother was able to save it to pass on to me. So this is my mother wearing her norige, and that's the norige that, actually I've seen it in a museum before too, so. And I've already given it to my oldest daughter. My mother was now stranded in Gyeongju and knew that she had to seek shelter and food, so she immediately went to the nearest Catholic medical clinic, declared herself to be a medical doctor, and was hired as a doctor at the clinic, was called to the front. One day, an American soldier showed up at the clinic and asked for her help. She got in the Jeep and headed towards the American camp. In the distance, she could see a line of American soldiers standing guard. But as she got closer, she realized they were not American, but Koreans, dressed in American uniforms. Until the American troops could show up, the few American soldiers there had taken Korean peasants and dressed them up to make the enemy think that there were lots of soldiers there. The American soldier explained that the Koreans were sick and weak and wanted to know how to help them. My mother asked them, and they said they were starving to death because all the Americans were giving them to eat were cookies and rotten food. It turned out that the Americans were feeding them crackers and cheese. My mother told the Americans that the Koreans needed rice and kimchi. Food was scarce in Korea at the time, and one day that same American soldier showed up at the clinic where my mother was working with a jeep load of canned ham, sugar, milk, and other necessities to thank her for her help. The clinic was Catholic, like I said, and my mother was so shocked when the nuns, overjoyed and grateful for all the food, threw themselves on the soldier and started hugging and kissing him. Then the North Koreans were advancing towards Gyeongju, so my mother was put on a train with all of the medical supplies and evacuated to Busan, a city at the southernmost tip of Korea. She was one of the lucky ones. She remembered seeing crowds of people desperately running after the train, begging to be let on. When she got to Busan, she became an army doctor in a U.S. Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, a MASH unit. In addition to the wounded, they were also responsible for the prisoners of war, or POWs. While treating the POWs, my mother came across a man who used to work in her father's hat shop. He recognized her, but she was afraid to speak to him since he was a North Korean soldier. He tried to slip her a message to give someone, but she refused, afraid he was using her as a courier for espionage. She did hope that when he returned to the North at the end of the war, he told her family that he had seen her and that she was now a medical doctor and doing well. So the scene to your left would be the refugees trying to escape from the northern part of South Korea. The middle picture is my mother wearing army uniform. She was never an officer in the military. She was an army doctor, a civilian doctor, but she did have to wear a uniform. And then the picture on your right is actually the POWs in the camp that she had to treat. After World War II ended, Tokyo Imperial University became Seoul National University, and my father also became separated from his family. Because he studied English in college and spoke it fluently, my father was asked to help transcribe the American Constitution into Korean, as it was going to be the basis for the new South Korean government. He graduated with a law degree and came first in the Foreign Service exam. This caught the attention of Ambassador Chang Myeon, later the Prime Minister of South Korea, and he asked my father to go with him in opening the first South Korean embassy in Washington, D.C. Unbeknownst to my father, he was assigned to carry all the money to purchase the building and the equipment for the new embassy. $2 million in a briefcase. When my father landed in Washington, D.C., he was so tired that he forgot about the briefcase and left it on the plane. Fortunately, it was still there when he went back into the plane to retrieve it. The South Korean embassy is still in the same building they purchased in 1949. It was in Washington, D.C. that my father and the other diplomats learned of North Korea's attack on South Korea. To aid all the Koreans on the west coast of the United States, my father was appointed the first Korean consul to Los Angeles. So to your left, that's the members of the first Korean embassy in the United States. So there's my handsome father. This is Chang Myeon, who actually later became the Prime Minister of South Korea. And I'm not sure who the other two gentlemen are. And this is my father at the Korean Council in Los Angeles. So he was actually the first Korean consul of the consulate in Los Angeles. At one point in the Korean War, General MacArthur drove the North Koreans back to the Chinese border. At that time, my father's family escaped to the south. Her mother came from a prominent family, and that's my grandmother, my father's mother. And her three brothers were the mayor, the police chief, and the school principal of the town. The communists dragged her brothers out into the street and shot them before her eyes. Only her younger brother escaped death because he immediately joined the North Korean army, and he actually became a general. Years later, my mother's friends, who also escaped to the south, told my mother that her father had come down to Seoul to look for her during that time, since they had not seen each other in 5 years. Unable to find her since she was already in Busan, he went back to North Korea, missing their one chance to meet again. Her friend also told her that when he came back, the communists accused him of being a traitor for going into the south and arrested him. He never came back and was most likely executed, not because he was a traitor, but because he was rich. At the army camp in Busan, my mother finally got to the point where she could no longer bear the horrors of war, the countless bombings, the sound of gunfire, amputations, surgeries, and deaths. My parents had been writing to each other, and one day my mother wrote to my dad and begged him to get her out of Korea. He found her a residency in a hospital in California and booked her passage to the United States on a cargo ship. All right, this is my father helping with the war effort for South Korea. So there he is, he's handing a box to a gentleman. And over here, they're getting ready to ship some supplies from the United States to South Korea. After my mother arrived, my father decided to get his master's degree at Georgetown University. They moved to Washington, D.C., where they got married in 1955, and my mother began working at a hospital in Maryland. So this is actually my mother when she first came to the United States. They did actually have a number of foreign doctors working in California. I think she said one of them was Filipino. So there she is. She's actually the only woman doctor, and there's a bunch of male doctors with her, and there she is in her medical outfit. All right. My father then decided to get his doctorate at My father then decided to get his doctorate at Harvard Law School, so they moved to Cambridge, where my mother worked as a doctor at a New England hospital. Okay, I think I'm off slide-wise, but this is my parents when they got married in Washington, D.C. Oh, sorry. All right. And this is my father. This is actually not a graduation picture, but this is a picture of all the international students that were at Harvard Law School back in 1956. So my father's standing right there. But there were, quite a number of international students at Harvard Law School at that time. Probably much less than what is there now. In 1961, my father became the first Korean national to receive a doctorate degree from Harvard Law School. And it's called an SJD, I think, it's a Doctor of Law. After receiving his degree, he was appointed director at the Bureau of International Relations and moved to Seoul, where my mother opened up her own medical practice. Within a few weeks of arriving in Korea, I remember cowering with my mother and my brother and sister in the dark, listening to sounds of tanks and guns. My mother was terrified and thought the North Koreans had attacked again. But in this case, it was a coup d'etat that established Park Chung-hee as a new president of South Korea. South Korea was still recovering from the Korean War and was very poor and underdeveloped. I still remember the muddy, unpaved roads in Seoul, and the few cars you could see were military jeeps. Even though we were well off according to Korean standards, our home had sliding paper doors, an underground kitchen with an open fire for cooking and heating the floors that we slept on, and an outhouse that was just a hole in the ground. There was no shower or bathtub, so we had to go to a public bathhouse. Crime was everywhere, so we had to have a guard dog and walls with barbed wire all around our house. My mother never made any money from her clinic because she was too good-hearted. One time, a young couple came into her clinic late at night. They had been turned away from every clinic they visited because the young woman was pregnant and the baby was breached. That means when the baby is coming out leg first. By the time they arrived at my mother's clinic, the baby's leg was sticking out. They had no money, but my mother took them anyway and saved both the baby and the mother. Another time, a frantic peasant came to the clinic and said his wife was dying. My mother grabbed her medical bag and started to follow him. They walked a long way and began climbing up a mountain as it got darker and darker. My mother started to fear for her life and told the man that she was going back down. Suddenly, the man grabbed her and put her on his back, carrying her the rest of the way to his home. Fortunately, the man was telling the truth, and his wife was indeed very sick and suffering from malnutrition. Once again, the man had no way to pay her, but my mother treated his wife and saved her life. All right, my father is getting, actually this is Ambassador Berger, Samuel Berger. You can actually find him on Wikipedia. He's a very famous diplomat. And he's presenting my father with his diploma because my father had to rush back to Korea, so he couldn't stay for his Harvard Law School graduation. But when the Americans got wind of the fact that he was the first Korean national to be receiving a doctorate degree from Harvard Law School, they wanted to make a special presentation. So here they are presenting him with his diploma. And right here, this is my mother. And because my dad was director of the Foreign Service School, I was chosen to present flowers to Ambassador Berger when he first came to Korea. So that's me, wearing a hanbok, and here is President Park Chung-hee. This was right after he took over with the coup d'etat, because he was a general in the Korean army, and he was actually the one who orchestrated the coup d'etat. And so there's him and his wife, and unfortunately his wife was assassinated. And of course you know that President Park Chung-hee was also assassinated by the director of the KCIA later. But unfortunately during an assassination attempt, his poor wife was murdered. So. All right, just want you to see how much Seoul has changed. When I went to Seoul in 1961, this is what Seoul looked like. All right, a lot of the streets in Seoul were not paved; they were dirt roads. you know, you can see this is an open market over here. And these are actual pictures from 1960. Well, not that I took, obviously, but I found them on the internet. And this was what Seoul looked like, you know, lots of little huts and things like that. This is Seoul in 2020. I'm very proud of my country. So you actually very much like Taiwan, right? So it looks like Taipei. You would think actually that it was Taipei if you looked at it without a heading. So, you know, we have a lot of skyscrapers, tall buildings, high rises. Of course, shopping is just like in Taiwan, lots of choices. I think, actually, I'm trying to think if there's, one of the pictures I saw even had Uniqlo, which is one of my favorite stores. So I know it's not Chinese or Korean, it's a Japanese store, but anyway, there it is. And let me see if I have one more picture. I don't think I do. Oh no, this is next, okay. After 3 years in South Korea, my father was appointed minister to the Korean mission at the United Nations, and we moved to New York City. My mother could no longer practice medicine, so she devoted herself to her 5 children and hosted diplomatic parties. So this is my father at the UN mission, the Korean mission to the United Nations. So see, it says Republic of Korea here. There's my dad. And then I guess they were going to some diplomatic function because here Ambassador Kim and my father are dressed in their formal tuxedos. Their morning suit, I think it's called. Then in 1967, my father was appointed Consul General to India. My father wanted to make our journey memorable, so he booked us cabins on the Queen Elizabeth, and we sailed from New York to Liverpool. From there, we visited London, then flew to Paris and Rome. We lived in a beautiful home in New Delhi, and as was the custom, had many servants. India had a very strict caste system back then, so each servant could only do a specific job. We had a cook, a dishwasher, a janitor, a gardener, butlers, guards, and chauffeurs. We took piano lessons, horseback riding lessons, and golf lessons. My parents had to travel a lot and entertain many foreign diplomats. My mother was very involved in charity work and working with both local and expat women. She became very proficient in many foreign languages, and everyone loved meeting her. My father concentrated on promoting trade between India and South Korea. South Korea was becoming a leader in producing rubber products, and India had a problem with overpopulation. So my father set up a deal where South Korea would sell condoms to India. As a child, I remember looking at a display of these products in the embassy, and no one would tell me what they were. It was years before I learned exactly what was in that display case. The deal was so successful that in 1969, South Korean President Park Chung-hee, whose picture you saw earlier, awarded my father the Order of Diplomatic Service Merit, the Gwanghwa Medal. We spent 6 wonderful years there and completely embraced the Indian culture. We dressed in Indian clothes, ate Indian food, still my favorite. Watched only Bollywood movies, my husband loves them too, and we own about 300 of them. And celebrated the fun Hindu festivals like Holi, where everyone wears white and throws colors on each other, or Diwali, where you light small clay pots filled with oil and decorate the outside of your home. My father loved to travel, so we went all around India. We went to Agra to see the Taj Mahal, stayed in a palace in Jaipur, and vacationed on a houseboat in Kashmir. After India, we transferred to Egypt. I was in high school there and met my husband at the American school in Cairo. There was also a North Korean consulate in Cairo, which created a very tense and stressful environment for my father. One time when my parents were away on an official trip, the North Koreans reported that my brothers and sisters and I were going to be kidnapped. Some officers from the South Korean embassy immediately came to our home to protect us, and we were not allowed to leave the house. Another time, the North Koreans reported that my mother had been kidnapped, news which got U.S. intelligence involved. My father was then appointed ambassador to Morocco and then to Jamaica. So these are some pictures of my father. The center one is him with his medal. I think he looks very dashing and important. He looks like a king or something. So there he is. These are several people that he's met in his career. This is him with Indira Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister of India. I think you would know her father was actually Nehru. That's my father and my mother. Here he's meeting with King Hassan II of Morocco. And over here, actually, this is just a picture from Egypt. That was the only one I could find. And I don't know who any of these people are, but you know, that's just to show that he was in Egypt at one point. Throughout his, my father loved to travel, taking us all around the world and to so many interesting places like Afghanistan and Iran. So this is to show a little bit of my family and to show some of the places. Here we are on the Queen Elizabeth, and this is Queen Elizabeth I, the original Queen Elizabeth. So that's us in the dining room. That's me right there, my sister, my brother. And at that time, my brother hadn't become the youngest one, so there's my mom. Here we are in Iran. So we were able to visit Iran when the Shah was there. So that's my family once again, over there. Over here, there we are in some temple in India. Here we are in Egypt. I think this is the Valley of the Kings. So if you have a chance to go to Egypt, I just went there like 3 years ago, and I thought it was safe, but you know, of course to me it was like going back home. Maybe to somebody else it might be a little scary to go to Egypt right now. And over here, which is also a very special picture, is us in Afghanistan. And we went there, of course, before there was the terrorism and the war and all that. Behind us, and I don't know if any of you know this, there used to be huge statues of Buddha carved into the side of the mountain. A national treasure, I mean, a worldwide treasure. It was a very precious thing. Even though if you're not Buddhist, it doesn't matter, it was art form. And unfortunately, it no longer exists because the Taliban took a bazooka and they destroyed the Buddha statue. So we were very fortunate to be able to have seen it with our own eyes before it got destroyed. Although we were all born in the United States, I'm skipping ahead. Throughout his diplomatic career, he fought hard to have South Korea recognized as the true Korea. He was a staunch supporter of democracy and the reunification of Korea and the harshest critic of communism. After my father retired from the diplomatic corps, he taught international law at universities in South Korea and Japan and wrote many books and articles. He also ran for member of parliament and was foreign affairs advisor to President Kim Dae-jung. So here's my father campaigning for member of parliament. Although we were all born in the United States and went to college in the United States and chose to become US citizens, my father was fiercely patriotic and never gave up his Korean citizenship. He lived his life loyal to the Republic of Korea and the South Korean government and devoted his life to freedom and fighting communism. My siblings and I all settled in the United States and begged him to come to live with us in the United States, but he refused and passed away in 2012 in the country that he probably loved more than his own family. After my father retired from the diplomatic corps, my mother also became a professor, teaching Korean language at the same university as my father in Japan. During school holidays, she went to Korea with him and helped him campaign when he ran for member of parliament. Let's see here, I'm going to skip ahead because I only have 3 minutes left. Okay. When my husband was sent to South Korea for the F-16 program in 1993, my mother frequently came from Japan to visit us and was very close to my 6 children, especially my twin daughters. After my father passed away, she became an American citizen and spent her retirement years visiting my siblings and her 13 grandchildren in Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, California, and Texas. All right. She loved politics, and she watched the news every day and knew the political situation in any country, and her favorite channel was CNN. My mother was very social and everyone loved her, and she was always smiling and laughing. However, I would sometimes find her weeping to herself. When I asked her what was wrong, she would say that she missed her family in North Korea and wondered how they were doing. As she got older with many health issues, I looked after her, and she told me many times that she would dream of her mother and her mother would have my face. My mother finally passed away last year at the age of 91 without ever being reunited with her family. 74 years passed without any news of her parents and her 4 little sisters and 2 little brothers. On her deathbed, when she finally fell asleep in her last moments, I leaned over my mother, I said I was going to cry, and assuming the role of the mother that she lost so young, I whispered to my mother and told her in Korean, "Little Ine, this is your mother. We are waiting for you. Come to us." Long time ago, I made 3 goals in my life: to go back to Korea, to learn Korean, and to find my mother's family. I have accomplished 2 of those goals, but I truly believe in my heart that I will accomplish the last one before I die. These are just some pictures of my family and how they grew over the years. There's me in 1957, I think I was 1 year old. So 1, then in South Korea in 1961, we had 3. There's me, my sister, and my brother. When we went to India, we had 5 in the beginning, and so there's all my siblings there. And then when we took this picture in Morocco in 1975, there's all 6 of us. That's me, my sister, and so on, and my father and mother. I'm actually toward the end, so I just want to say, from 2 North Korean refugees, a legacy. This is my family now. There's 29 of us without my parents. So actually over here, that's me, of course. And then my children are as follows. There's Owen. Where's Jonathan? Jonathan, Rebecca, Matthew, Elizabeth, and Mary. They're twins. And then these are my grandchildren right here, Gwyneth and Gavin. Their mother is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman, so they've lost their Korean trait. They're only 1/4 Korean. One more page. I do not know what your political preferences are or what your desire is for the future of Taiwan, the Republic of China. But I know from my parents' experiences and from my own personal experience that a government where you have the freedom to vote for and choose your leaders, the right to decide the way your country should be run, and the voice to decide the future of your lives is the best form of government there is. Because of South Korea's experiences with North Korea, my parents and I have always had sympathy and a special place in our hearts for Taiwan. I've only lived here 3 years, but I already love this country and was grieved to find out that many countries, including the United States, as well as the World Health Organization, do not recognize Taiwan as a country. When I return to the United States, I tend to do all I can to fight this injustice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Veronica. It's a very legendary family story, and thank you to support Taiwan.
Okay, we love you.
I love everybody.
So as a small souvenir,
Thank you.
shall we have a picture? And please, Cornell. Yes.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, you have a picture of us. Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So let's proceed our rotary procedure.
My mom is the same age as your mom.
Oh, 1928.
Now she's 92 years old.
Wow.
She's in Houston.
Oh.
She's been long time.
That's great to be